Hello there, welcome to Second Look. This is Todd Perkins, one of the pastors here at East North Church, bringing you the content of this past Sunday's message in 15 minutes, or sometimes even less. Sometimes we go over. It's just the way that it is. The whole idea of doing Second Look is to give our missional community leaders and those who are participating in missional community groups a chance to kind of recap the content so that they can be prepared, rethink about it, because not all of us have a full 45-minute sermon. Listening to a full 45-minute sermon a second time, it's a little bit to ask, I understand. But that's what we're doing here today, and this past Sunday we looked at not just a character in the Old Testament, but a whole bunch of characters, and those characters come from the book of Judges. Now, if you read over in Hebrews 11, even the author of Hebrews makes the statement that we've been making, and that is time. We don't have enough time to go into the details of guys like Samson and Gideon and Deborah and Barak and all of these different people that in the author of Hebrews' perspective are serving as an example of having faith, believing in a promise of a God who is and a God who will deliver. But as we take a look, and by the way, you may be better served to just go back and watch that Bible Project overview of the book of Judges. The link is included in the description for this podcast, and I just really appreciate the helpful way those guys just bring some concepts into light and solidify them. So if you watch that video, as we did this past Sunday, you'd see this pattern, a couple of different patterns. The first pattern in the book of Judges is one that might sound a little bit familiar, and that is like, Israel is doing okay until they depart from God's ways, and then because they have departed from God's ways and disobeyed God and no longer are turning to God, they're looking just like the culture and doing what the culture around them are doing, which leads to their own trouble. Their consequences for sin, guys, it's always going to happen, always going to be that way. And there also seems to be some movement on God's part to judge them for departing from Him, and that leads them into trouble, and trouble leads to suffering, and then they have to cry out for God to deliver them, and so God does send someone to deliver them, and they do get back on track, but it's not long before that whole cycle repeats itself. So that's a pattern that's brought up in the beginning of the book of Judges and a pattern that's revealed throughout the book of Judges. The other pattern that we notice is that the men God uses to deliver Israel are not perfect men. They're weak men from the beginning, with Gideon, who sort of presents himself almost as a coward from the beginning. And they're progressively corrupt men, all the way to, even in the Bible Project animation, they kind of don't even go into the details of the story just because it's so gory and bad. And so it kind of brings up a question that I wanted us to think about, and it's this reality that it's sort of, there are two sides to this reality. On the one hand, these men that God is using to deliver Israel are no examples to follow. So these are not men, God's not using them and therefore validating their behaviors. And we need to be careful about reading the Bible as if that were the case in every situation. I don't know if you have the pleasure of having someone who trolls you on social media, but I've had a number in my day. And if you don't know what a troll is, it seems like they're just waiting to be against anything that you say. And occasionally I'm doing just my own personal life, picture of the family or enjoying something, or maybe something I think is funny. I'm sharing those kind of things. But the majority of my day or the majority of my posts are really intentional for gospel clarity and gospel encouragement. But there are people out there that don't, necessarily want to agree. And there's one particular person who is very much an atheist, agnostic kind of person, and he sees the Bible as full of all of these atrocities, which he's not wrong to observe that. But he misinterprets the context of these atrocities being in the Bible as if God were giving it a big thumbs up and actually sort of approving it. For example, the character who is in the book of Judges who makes the promise, and I'm going to look it up so I can find his name, Japheth. This is Judges 11, and he makes this vow to God. He says, if you let me win, God, I'll sacrifice whatever comes out of my house first when I get back. The foolishness of that kind of arrangement between him and God should be self-evident. That is an outright stupid vow that God would not require Japheth to make or to keep. And the purpose of including it in the story, or the reality is that Japheth did not understand God. He didn't understand the character of God. And the only thing he had to draw from was the character of the gods of the Canaanites. And he thought that God must just operate that way. In order for him to secure a pretty significant victory where the odds seemed stacked against him, he thought he had to make some kind of arrangement. God, if you give me the victory, I'll sacrifice whatever comes out of my door. And his daughter comes out of the door when he gets back from winning the battle, and he sacrifices her. And in no way is the Bible or is God behind that as a good way to do business. That is not good in any way. It's morally bankrupt. And so, here are these men, a number of men, and even a few women, and not all of them have the same sin as Japheth here, but none of them necessarily fit into a category of worth following because of their high moral character. In fact, as you read through the book of Judges, you'll find that that's increasingly not true. And yet, God still uses these morally disturbed, morally off, morally bankrupt men to accomplish his purpose. Now, that should give us some encouragement, because it means that God can use us even when we're not morally perfect. That idea is in no way to validate a continuance in your moral imperfection. Samson is this hair-trigger, angry guy who just doesn't seem to know how to respect God's boundaries. Left and right, he's doing things wrong. He spends, his story ends up literally being in the hands of a prostitute. He is not a good guy. He does mass murder to sort of get vengeance. It is a bad dude. So we can't hold Samson up and be like, oh, what a hero. What we can say is here is this messed up man that God used. So what does that mean for me and you? Well, it means that God can use messed up people like me and you. It doesn't mean that we have to validate or approve any of the messed up things that they're doing. Which also is bring that home for not just you and your relationship with God, but just look how God works. God willingly works through morally corrupt people to accomplish his purpose. That doesn't mean he validates their moral corruption. In fact, God would stand against them through his word. And that should be somewhat of an encouragement. We should say, man, that's incredible. God would choose to work through messed up people. And it also gives us room to say, you know what? It is possible for us as followers of Jesus to be for someone, just like God is for us, even when we don't do all the right things, to be for someone, but not approve of everything that they're doing, not be on the same page, not getting behind them, not validating or endorsing the ways in which they are wrong. We can be for someone and not agree with them at the same time. We can walk alongside those people in a loving way, in a gracious way, guiding them towards truth, encouraging them, equipping them, even when they have values that don't line up with what we understand God's word to express. We can walk with those kind of people. We don't have to disassociate ourselves with them. We don't have to make them the bad guys, because clearly God hasn't done that with these knuckleheads in the book of Judges. God has said, this is what I have to work with. Messed up people who don't understand me, messed up people who don't quite have the value system that I want them to have. And I can still work through them and include them in the story of my redemptive plan. So the two big takeaways would be to take hope in the reality that God would be willing to use you even if you have major flaws. In no way is that an endorsement of you to continue on to do the things that would not be good and right and true and just and loving. And it also means that we can be for people just like God is for us, and not necessarily be guilty of simultaneously endorsing their bad way of life. We can love people who are living out their lives not in tune with the gospel. And it doesn't mean we're endorsing them. It means that we're walking with them in love and trying to help them understand who God is. And so that's sort of just one soapbox for the day, I guess you could say, as I continue to read and study the Bible and we move through these character studies. The reoccurring theme in the book of Judges is that there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The good news that we have in the gospel tells us that Jesus is our king, and we can do what's right in his eyes. We can be like Jesus, who's a friend of sinners, who can be for people without endorsing them. And that's what makes Jesus a better person to follow, someone that we can get behind, someone that we would say, you know what, I don't need to live my life like one of the judges. They're not moral examples to follow. Might doesn't make right, as one person said Sunday. What makes us right is the gift of the gospel, the gracious imputation of righteousness that is put into us through the substitutional death of Jesus for our own sins. That's what makes Jesus better than all the characters in the book of Judges, and better than anything else. He's the best option that we have. So let's keep chasing after Jesus and keep encouraging one another to be loving and gracious in light of and through the truth of the gospel that we proclaim together.